Hey guys, it's Scott with Scottie B Cards, and in this video I want to discuss Shohei Ohtani rookie cards and what is in store for them. Shohei Ohtani, he has been hurt recently. He has partially torn his UCL. If you've been paying attention to any news outlet, you will see them talking about it. He's a big enough star now where even major people like Washington Post and CNN are talking about it, which is good, I guess, for growing the brand of baseball, but bad because one of the best players all time does have a potential Tommy John injury. So I want to discuss in this video what's going to happen to his cards. I want to compare to other past superstars who had injuries over the last few years and what happened to their cards, and then we can look at some price data of what's happened so far since the injury has been announced, and if we think they're going to continue to drop. So let's just jump into it. Tommy John is generally when you tear your UCL in your elbow, they will take a ligament or tendon from usually your forearm, they'll put that onto your elbow, they'll drill into your bone, they'll wrap it around, and that is your new UCL. And the goal of Tommy John is to make it so pitchers who actually get hurt are able to continue to pitch, because prior to Tommy John, this was like a career-ending injury. Ohtani had a Tommy John surgery back in 2018. When he was a rookie, he actually did tear his UCL. He had UCL damage coming over from Japan, and because of that, he had Tommy John, I believe, on October 1st, 2018, but he was back May 7th hitting, and he hit that entire year. Had pretty subpar numbers compared to Ohtani standards, but he was back the following year pitching in 2020. So that's the whole saga of his timeline and recovery, and usually one Tommy John isn't gonna really kill you. Sometimes people even come back from Tommy John, and they throw harder and are better pitchers. But what about a second Tommy John? He had that Tommy John in 2018. Does this UCL mean he has to have Tommy John? Not exactly, but let's say he does have that. There was an article talking about Jacob deGrom because Jacob deGrom is having his second Tommy John surgery. He's recovering it right now. Generally with Tommy John, for a pitcher, you have at least a year recovery, and on a second Tommy John, as you can see from this very first sentence, it can take significantly longer to recover from that. The one thing I do want to point out though is you do not always need to have Tommy John surgery to repair a UCL depending on the severity of the tear of the UCL, and we saw that with Tanaka back in like the 2010s. He partially tore his UCL and actually just rehabbed it. So this is actually from an article from CBS Sports, I believe. Tanaka originally suffered a partial UCL tear in his throwing elbow in 2014, a diagnosis that often leads to Tommy John surgery. Instead of going under the knife, Tanaka and his physicians opted for a more conservative approach focused on rehabilitation. So that still could happen. So I want to point that at the beginning, but now that we've established all that, what happened to Ohtani, what's going on, and what the potential outcomes are, either he'll be having Tommy John surgery again this offseason, and then he'll be hitting all next year and then pitching a year or two in the future, or he is going to just not have Tommy John, have rehab the entire offseason, and he'll be back doing both in the future. So those are like the two scenarios we basically have, and I want to just lay those out there first. So the next thing, what does this mean for his cards? I want to point out that Ohtani is not very old yet. I think he's 28 or 29. And because of that, he still has time to recover and be back and pitching in his like age 31 season or even age 30 season. And that's really not that bad, especially for how historical he's been the last few years. This is his second MVP he's going to win. I just will say that he's going to win. He's still hitting and he's hitting well. He may opt to have Tommy John and hit exclusively the next few years, or he might just opt to try to recover like Tanaka did and just keep hitting until he's ready next year. But regardless, he is still an impact bat. So I want to point that out. Even if he does not necessarily pitch as well or pitch at all, the thing that really gets people going about Ohtani is if he's hitting amazing and is pitching subpar, it's okay because he's hitting so well. And he's still a above average pitcher and having positive value on that side of the ball. But on top of that, if he's hitting poorly and pitching fantastic, you don't hear as much praise. And so the bat really does drive a lot of the market values. We see that with pitchers not having a ton of collectability. Ohtani's a unicorn, but I want to point out still people love the offensive capabilities of Ohtani that's paired with the pitching. I don't think it's really vice versa a little bit because it's extremely hard for pitchers to hit. I could be off base. That's just my opinion on it. But I do also want to point out his cards are currently at an all-time high. They are so expensive right now, and he has so many rookie cards. So if they drop, I don't think it's necessarily because of the injury, and I think it's more because his cards were so baked into him making the playoffs and him winning an MVP and having one of the best seasons of all time. And because of that, I think they're going to drop, but it's not exactly because of this injury. It's more of the Angels failing to meet expectations. We see this with Trout cards every year, unfortunately. I want to point out again, his historic performance is done. Like, he has done enough hitting and pitching. Like, even if the next 2 years he doesn't hit and pitch, he just hits, I think he has done enough where his cards are going to maintain value at a really high level. They are going to cool down, and it will be because of the injury, but mainly just because they're cooling off from the peak. We see that with every single type of card, and he may have another peak in the next few years. Who knows? But his performance is done. I think he'll be looked at very well in the future and people looking back on this era of baseball. I want to look at Ronald Acuna Jr. when he tore his ACL. He tore his ACL on July 10th, 2021, and this is a year graph of his Bowman Chrome autograph from that time. You'll see it maintained flat or went up. His injury did not affect his cards heading into the 2022 season, and what affected his cards was actually the 2022 season and sports cards cooling down. It was less of Acuna not playing and more of cards cooling down. I want to show that with actually Juan Soto, Acuna, and Ohtani. In that exact same time frame, Ohtani dropped 41% on his PSA 10 Bowman Chrome autograph, Juan Soto dropped 21% on his PSA 10 Bowman Chrome autograph, and Acuna dropped 19%. I remember watching this and I was very surprised it did not drop more. And I think that same thing might happen with Ohtani as well. I want to point out again, he had Tommy John surgery on October 1st, 2018, but he was back hitting on May 7th, 2019. That's what both of these show, these news articles. And the reason I'm showing that is because I actually want to see how his cards performed for his first Tommy John surgery. I want to look at his Topps Chrome base card. We can see that it dropped about 49% from basically $27 down to about $15. So we saw a $13 change. It was a pretty big drop for all of these lower end cards, but surprisingly, any of his high end cards, I couldn't find many because not many of them are actually in card ladder, and Market Movers doesn't go that far back. But the ones that were in card ladder that were relatively high end, they were either flat or up or only slightly down. None of them were taking big hits. That was more of the lower end to mid end. The higher end generally did okay. Here is a card that wasn't necessarily super high end at the time with the Topps Chrome Sapphire compared to other cards. And so my point is, I think his high end cards are going to be okay, and I will show that in a moment. I do want to show as well, this is his index from Card Ladder. He is still barely dropping. It's a little tiny blip. It's nothing crazy. We have seen some of his daily sales volume drop, but it's not been anything too crazy either. And here is the performance of 5 different cards. None of them are crazy high end. And again, I want to point out the non-crazy high end, there is a massive drop right here. And you think that's going to be because of the Tommy John issue or the UCL tear. That's actually not the case. That was on August 1st to 10th. And it dropped August 1st to 10th just because the Angels' playoff aspirations died and a lot of his values died as well after the trade deadline. So I want to point out actually his high-end cards. And again, I went to Market Movers for this because they actually track these cards. Card Ladder does not track very many cards. Market Movers does a significantly better job. I want to point that out for them. But a lot of his high-end is actually up even after his injury. This is his top PSA 10 Bowman Chrome hitting autograph blue refractor. It's down slightly, like nothing crazy. It's down just like, I know just $5,000, but compared to still being worth $33,000, it's still decent. And then we can see his green Bowman Chrome autograph pitching, even though one sold in May of 2023 for, what is this, about $17,000. This last one went for about $35,000. So we can see it's up big time, even though he's hurt. And this is all after he was hurt. And then we can see this one is his pitching. This is the blue refractor. The last one sold in July. So actually, while he was very hot, and this PSA 10 actually went for more at $30,000, just barely. So his high-end market is still okay, which again, I think is not too surprising. So I want to point out Ohtani's cards dropped again because the hype cycle of the playoffs and the missing the playoffs. It's not too surprising. I don't think there's been a big correlation for his higher or mid-end to high-end cards of it dropping. I fully expect his lower-end cards to drop because of this, but not the higher-end cards. And there is still free agency coming up, and people are still going to pay a ton for the next 10 years of Shohei Ohtani. Even with the injury at the front, they will view it as him still being able to play next year or at least half the year as a hitter, and then want his pitching services later in his career. So I still think that's going to keep his cards up, even though he does have that injury lingering over him. His cards will drop more if he gets Tommy John, but I don't think it's as much as people expect because of who he is in the hobby right now. He's transcending people who just collect baseball into other sports, and he's into the main social media world, which is hard for a baseball player to do. And the one thing I will say is what will drop his cards, and it's totally plausible, is if he comes back from injury. I think his cards will be going up when that happens. Just, it's pretty obvious that happens with hype. But if he comes out and he does not hit well, and if he does not pitch well, or if he's only hitting and has a slow start, that is where you're going to see the drop. I don't think him not playing right now is really going to harm him too much. It will drop. I don't think it's going to be any catastrophic movement where you're going to get great buying opportunities. But what will cause that is if he has a really bad first year back from injury. That's where we may may see some issues. So those are my complete opinionated thoughts on this. I may be entirely wrong, but that's what I see from other data from Acuna's injury and Ohtani's previous injury. And I do think Ohtani will probably be fine in the long run because of who he is and how well he's already done. I don't think he needs to have seasons like the last two again. He can have 5 to 6 worse seasons and not 10 worse seasons for a few seasons, and I think he'll get to the Hall of Fame. So that's my thoughts on Ohtani. Thanks for watching. I'd love to hear what your thoughts are on him, if you think his cards are toast or if you think he'll be all right. Other than that, I will see you in the next video.